Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're going to talk about having difficult conversations, and we're going to try to make this as easy as possible for you guys. So we do have a lot of material to go through, and as we follow through, for those that are willing to stick around to the end, we have some extra bonus material we've kind of put on to talk about what do we do when things start to take a bit of a turn. So as we get started, if you can just follow through the agenda, you'll see me, you'll see the agenda. We're going to bounce back and forth. But right now, what I want to talk about as we go through these conversations is the first thing is you want to use your words. Remember that if you try to use someone else's words, it's going to come off as insincere, phony, fake. So whatever we talk about today, just make sure that you're putting it in context of what you would normally say. So if you're tend to be a serious person and you start using a lot of jokes and things like that, it'll sound a little bit off. So just remember that when you're doing this, you're always going to put it into your own words. Having said that, remember that the story you're sharing is somebody else's story. This is not just about you. It does affect you, but we're going to be talking about problems that your child or children are having. And so we want to be careful because once that information is out there, people are going to know it, and it's hard for them to unknow it. So as we go through this, remember, it's not just your story, it's somebody else's story. And here's the tough part is you can't take those words back. Everyone remembers the harshness, but it's hard for them to remember the kindness. So when you talk about something that is difficult and you're going through it and then you lash out, I hate you, I wish you never were born, why did I get stuck with you in this family? Those kind of things, it's hard to unring that bell. So what we want to really focus on is when you're talking to them, try to remember that they're going to remember all the harsh things you say. You can say 100 kind things, and the one time you said, I hate you, they'll remember that for 20 years. However, you probably already said those things. So what we're going to talk about is how do you fix it? You can't take it back, but you can fix it. So if you can wait to the end, we're going to really kind of get back to this and how do you actually fix what it is that you've said. Just remember it's about the theme. You don't have to memorize the words, but if you do find that I just don't have my own words, you can use these words and you can use the things that we're going to talk about later today, but just remember that you're going to need to practice it. It has to sound like you. And so we'll take some time practicing, and the best way to practice it is to believe it. If you believe it, it's going to come across as sincere, but you have to believe it. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. So we need to talk about what do they have? What is a diagnosis and how do you get one? So for the kids that are just having some problems, you might not even be at the stage of trying to figure out what do you call it. You just want to say, hey, look, how do I stop them from being a stinker? For the ones that are in more of a serious situation, you probably went through a therapist, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, probably went through some of these things and you tried to get some sort of diagnosis, an understanding of what's actually happening. And so one of the things that we're talking about is the DSM, right? This is like a cookbook. And so the way you get a diagnosis is, in essence, you go to a therapist, a psychologist, psychiatrist, a mental health professional, and you tell them what the problems are. And they're going to try to find out, do they have 5 out of 7 of these or 7 out of 9 of those? And they're going to give you some label. It could be oppositional defiant disorder, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, conduct disorder, a sleep disorder, whatever it happens to be. What does that mean for us? Well, in essence, a diagnosis is just a collection of symptoms that helps another professional identify what the actual problem is. So if you tell me that your child has oppositional defiant disorder, at a glance, I can say, okay, I basically know what that means. They like to argue about things, nothing's their fault. They can battle with a lot of people and then be fine the next minute, versus a conduct disorder is a person that's a little more cruel. They have a little more of a meanness streak to them that doesn't ever seem to go away. So when you go and get a diagnosis, just understand that it is just a label. So can it be fixed? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about how to fix some of this. And it's not about getting rid of something or not getting rid of something. What we're really trying to identify is they have these symptoms. What am I going to do about it? No different than if you had allergies or if you had diabetes or any other medical condition. We're going to work on getting that treated. So don't spend all your time trying to find out what they have. As a matter of fact, I find that we spend 90% of our time trying to diagnose something and come up with a name for it and 10% of the treatment, because diagnosing is a lot easier than treating something. And you really want to focus on getting things better. So will the testing help? Well, it really depends on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So if you need to find out an IQ, if you need to find out where they're functioning, if they're having problems in a particular area, whether it's their memory, their short-term or long-term memory, whether it's their processing speed, how well they're taking information in, this can help educators, it can help professionals try to identify the best way of conveying information, whether it's through mathematics or whether it's reading, language arts, whatever that you're trying to understand. We're trying to best help them. So if you have, excuse me, if you have a child that has problems with processing speeds, you want to make sure that they have extra time on tests. You want to provide these real simple interventions that are going to help the child along. Conversely, if they have memory issues, then maybe writing things down, having cue cards, those types of things can be really beneficial for them. When it comes to behavior management, now this is where we kind of fall a little short. What we're trying to do is we're trying to identify what is it that they have, but just understand that when you complete the testing and you say, this is what they have, this is what it is, it's not going to be a recipe to how to fix it. As a matter of fact, you're still going to rely on the professionals that are going to be dealing with you. So having that test, having those results isn't necessarily going to change the treatment, which is one of the reasons why when people ask me, should I get my child tested, whether it's a neuropsych test, whether it's an IQ test, whatever it happens to be, my answer is always the same. Will it change depending on what the answer is? And you're like, I don't know. Well, then you want to find that answer out. You don't want to start testing for the sake of testing. I had one family that I was working with, and the father had a work event. It's kind of like an office party. It was for the holidays, and the whole family went, and all the other families were there. And when the dad was talking to some of his coworkers, his daughter, who was 13 at the time, went up, and out of nowhere, she just started talking about, you've got a lot of hair growing out of your nose. And he was like, okay. And she was really fixated on all the hair coming out. You really need to shave that. And it was extremely embarrassing. And so he tried to get out of the conversation fairly quickly. And then a few days later, I went to go see them, and they were distraught. They were beside themselves. It was an extremely embarrassing situation. They didn't know whether she had some sort of Asperger, some sort of disorder. They wanted to find out, should we do some testing, some evaluation? And what I said to them is, if you were to tell somebody else that story, or somebody were to tell you that story and say, we're having a conversation, they're talking about the hairs growing out of my nose and it was extremely embarrassing, would somebody say, whoa, that is really embarrassing, I don't know how you handle that? Or would they say, this child sounds like they need some psychosocial evaluation and we should start testing right away? Well, probably you're just going to say that's a really embarrassing situation. See, something that is powerful doesn't necessarily mean that needs to be identified with anything other than, well, what are you going to do about that? But if it's something that is recurrent, something that doesn't seem to go away, and it continues happening time and time and time again, and it gives you some peace of mind to identify what it is, certainly go ahead and do the testing. Just remember that everyone has something. When you go through this book, the reason why nobody's supposed to diagnose themselves is because everyone has OCD or anxiety or some oppositional behaviors within them. Everyone has something in the book. And the idea is that how far does it go? So one of the old jokes that has always been around is that when you go to a psychiatrist, you're going to get a label no matter what happens. The moment you walk into their office, they're going to identify you with something. So if you arrive early to the appointment, you're anxious. If you arrive late, you're resistant. And if you arrive on time, you're compulsive. No matter what, you're going to get something. And the reality is that sometimes it is just what it is. The real question, the thing that you need to always be asking yourself is not what do they have, how do they got it, why do they have it? It's what are you going to do about it? And that's what we're going to talk about through the rest of this webinar, is we're going to talk about what do you do about these problems? Because if you don't know what to do about them, then what you call them is really meaningless. So whose business is this really? Who should you be telling? What should you be telling? How do you go about telling it? Well, the first thing you have to ask yourself is the information, is this public or private? So if the child is doing something, they're acting out, they're having in some way a problem, well, that's actually public information, right? So if they're in the middle of the store, they're having problems, they're screaming at people, well, that's not something that you really have to keep a secret. You don't have to really say, well, I don't want to talk about that, because it's already available. The child has acted it out in some way, shape, or form, and you cannot undo that event. But if they're telling you about their own personal private thoughts, they have dreams, they have things that they're just sharing or things that they want to keep inside, well, that is personal. That's private information. That information you should be very, very careful about sharing. Because if you do share that information, they can be extremely embarrassing for them. It could violate some trust, those types of issues. But when I go to somebody's house and I say, so what's going on? They're like, well, we don't want to talk about in front of the other kids. The other kids know it. They know exactly what's happening. You don't want to talk about this child having a tantrum, cursing you out and throwing things. We don't have to talk about it in front of the kids. But you are not having any secret conversations because everyone knows what's going on. As a matter of fact, in a family, if you say on the count of 3, I'm going to ask you to point to the child that's having the most problems. You say 1, 2, 3, point. Who's everybody pointing to? If everyone's really pointing to the same person or a couple people, then you really know this is a problem that has to be worked out. So who do we tell? Well, whether it's personal, private information or the public information, some people really just should know. Your pediatrician absolutely should know. That's the first person you should be talking to, seeing if there's something that we can get through on that initial level. But there are psychiatrists that are designed specifically to deal with these issues. So a pediatrician will only get you so far, but if you wanted to go more, you'd want to talk to a psychiatrist, a therapist. Sometimes we joke about this, but oftentimes it's quite real. A lawyer, if you needed to, right? This lawyer is representing you. If there is actually a problem within the community or the school-related issues, things like that, you want the lawyer to know what's going on. School, you do want to talk to the school if services are requested. Otherwise, you're going to want to kind of hold back a little bit. A hospital, especially if it's a psychiatric hospital, you're going to share more information. Family, you get the gist. The idea is that there are going to be people you have to talk to. And so how do we go about having these conversations? Well, the trick is you have to start with yourself. See, if you don't believe it yourself, then it's lost before we even started. The first thing that we tell people, it's not your fault. Whatever they have, you didn't give it to them. It's genetics. One time somebody told me kids are like jelly beans, and you reach into a jar and you pull out a jelly bean and you really don't know who it is. If I have 2 children of my own, my first child is extremely compliant. My second child is a little rambunctious, right? Same parents, same everything. They just are 2 different kids. And so what you want to do is treat them differently. So don't think of this as your fault unless it is. See, if it is your fault, if you had a drinking problem of your own, you have anger management problems of your own, you have these issues, you've abandoned somebody, maybe it is not necessarily your fault in a bad way, but you've adopted somebody, so you brought somebody into the home. Those are things that we're going to have to work on fixing. But a lot of the times you have kids that it really isn't your fault. So if you're in a grocery store and your child's in the frozen food section, they're yelling at you and throwing frozen peas all over the place, unless you actually said, hey, go over there and start whipping peas and acting like a crazy person, unless you actually said that, it really isn't your fault. It's always the child's fault. Now, I didn't actually put this in the slides because it usually takes some explaining and people sometimes don't remember this whole thing. But we have a theme here that says it's always the child's fault. And what that means is it's not about blaming somebody, but it's about the ability to fix something. See, if it's a child's fault, then they have the ability to fix it. They can make it better. But if it's somebody else's fault, if they're the victim of the circumstance, if it's beyond their control, then there's nothing they can do to fix it, and they become a victim, and you don't want them to be a victim. You want to focus on, how do we make this better? How does the child make this better? So don't get bogged down into, this is my problem, I have to work it out. It is everybody's problem. What is a disability? This is going to be another really key point. Is a disability is kind of like somebody that has a wheelchair, except the wheelchair is inside of the person. It is a way of seeing this in a sense that not everyone else can see. Because you look at a child that has anxiety problems and they look like a normal child. You look at a child that has oppositional problems, they look like any other child. You see a child that's in a wheelchair, you see a child that has a feeding tube, you see a child that has some serious physical ailments, and then you could say, oh, well, that's different. But a disability is a disability across the board. Whether it is that you're blind, whether you can't walk, or whether you have emotional needs, a disability means that you have the inability to make this go away. Now, we're not going to be able to solve these problems, especially not here today, but there are things that you can do to mitigate these disabilities, that you can make things better. But just understand, it is not the child just because they're being spoiled. You didn't spoil them into this. You didn't get them to the point where it's their fault. They're trying to make you mad. They're trying to be annoying. They're trying to get under your skin. A disability means that they can't stop it. So whether you gave them a new computer or $100 or whatever gift you got, if you can give them that gift and then it's never a problem, then it's not a disability. But if you can give them their most secret desires and say, here you go, if you don't have any problems, you can have this, and they get that reward and they still have the problems, that tells you that they really didn't have a chance to fix it in the first place. So it's not about blaming people, not about blaming yourself, not about blaming the child, but it's about identifying who can fix what. The one thing that these kids all have in common is that they're good kids with good hearts and good souls, but they keep doing bad things and they don't know why. They don't understand what it is that they're doing. They're not waking up saying, hey, I want to have no friends. I want to be in a special school. I want to take medication. I want to go to therapy. I want to always be in trouble with my parents or with the school. I want to not have privileges. I want everything taken away from me. Nobody goes in with that understanding. They don't understand why. And the truth of the matter is neither do doctors. We don't really get exactly why they have problems. What we focus on is how to fix things, how to mitigate, how to make things better. But in the end, that doesn't mean that they're not good. As a matter of fact, we talk about this all the time. You got these good kids that are doing well, and parents say they're a great kid until they're not. But then they go back to being a great kid. And the key is to keep the greatness and bring down that monster, that anxiety, that whatever it is that's causing them to pull down. But you do have to talk yourself out of this. And we really want to focus on shame versus embarrassment. Now, the reason why we're talking about all these things is because when we go to have conversations with others, if we don't believe this, if we don't understand, then that's not going to come across. And so shame is really about feeling bad about who you are versus embarrassment versus the idea that I feel guilty about something I've done wrong, because we've all had our fails. We've all had the, oops, I shouldn't have said that. Oops, I shouldn't have done that. But guilt and embarrassment is different than shame. You should not feel bad about who you are as a parent, as a person. They shouldn't feel bad about who they are as a child. What we do need to do is work on fixing it. And to be embarrassed about something, to have guilt about something, you can do something to make that better, right? If you're feeling shameful about the incident, then we really need to look at this as a bigger picture and say, okay, we really have to get something in place. We really have to get a framework down so you don't have to stay in that spot. One of the things that you really want to focus on is when you talk to people, understand that anxiety breeds compassion. So when you look at somebody that is anxious and you say, my child is anxious, then we're like, oh, that's so, that's bad, but I know what it feels like. Bring them in. Let me talk to them. We can handle this. Anxiety pulls people together. But if you talk about ADHD with your child and they're hyperactive, people are going to be like, oh, they're going to be bouncing off the walls. That's really annoying. Oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, it scares people, right? So usually when we talk about it, without regard to what their diagnosis is, if you talk about anxieties, it will breed compassion. It will make people feel like they can connect because people want to help other people that are anxious. But we have to talk to our families, right? Once you get past talking to yourself, who is next around you, right? And what you're going to need is a support system that is going to work with you, not against you. You need a framework. You need something to pull you guys together to get through these hard times. What are you going to do? Because if you're just hoping that things will get better, hope is really not a great strategy as your primary mode, right? You want to be able to utilize hope as this would be great if it happens, but we need to create our own hope. So it starts with your partner. You have to connect with each other. Just make sure that you're making supportive spousal statements. You are supporting the other person, not necessarily have to agree with everything they do, and say, I wouldn't necessarily do it this way, but it is important that you do it. It's funny because in our household, my wife and I see things a little bit differently. So when my children were younger, and they're still pretty young, they'll jump on the furniture. And my wife's like, don't let them jump on the furniture because when they go to somebody else's house, they're going to jump on it too. I'm like, that's okay. We'll tell them not to jump on it. But sometimes they want to jump on some furniture. The truth of the matter is I jump on the furniture too, and we have a great time. But when it comes down to eating, I cut up all their food in little micro bites, right? Even spaghetti, I chop them all up because I don't want anyone choking on my watch. And my wife is like, they have teeth, they can chew, right? And I'm like, I know, but it concerns me. Now, who is right and who is wrong? Well, you may say kids shouldn't jump on furniture, and you may say that, no, they can chew, or no, we certainly should cut up that food. But it doesn't mean we have to agree with each other, but we understand that when it comes down to cutting up the food, I just cut it up differently. And my children eat, and they're fine no matter who serves that meal, but we have a framework. We don't have to agree with each other, but when I'm doing something, I can do it. When my wife's doing something, my wife can do it. It's not about blaming. It's not about saying this is the way you should do it, or saying because their problems are blowing up on your watch, that means you're doing something wrong, because it might not be. It goes back to the child's having the problems. The child can fix it. Let's not put the blame on anyone other than the person having the behavior problems. We as a society like to go and see somebody in the store throwing peas and saying those parents are to blame. But the truth of the matter is that we want to keep focusing on the child, let the child fix it. Just remember that if the best plan that you have that you don't really implement isn't going to be successful. However, a plan that's not great, that's implemented aggressively, that you guys are trying, at least you will have a direction. And that's what we want to do, is we want to make sure that whatever you're going to come up with, even if it's not the best plan, you guys have a plan to move forward. But your children aren't going to see it the same way, especially the siblings, because you might have one child that's having problems, but the other children don't have problems. Now they're going to be upset, keeping in mind that they all know what's happening is not normal. They want normal. You need to fix it. You need to make things better. And the child doesn't understand that, hey, look, there's no parenting manual. I don't know how to raise a child that has a specific issue. They don't get it. They just want you back in control. They want you to fix it, because if you can't fix it, it's a free-for-all. So what you want to do is identify to them, yes, this is a problem. This is an issue. This is not normal. and we are seeking out help, but we're also have a framework. This is what I want you to do. And you have to have everybody to have a plan of action. They have to have something to do. It's no different than a fire drill, right? If there's big problems occurring, what do you want people to do? Because it is not a free-for-all. Everyone has to have a direction. If you want to get somebody to understand that this is a problem, you focus on the fact that this is a disability because it breeds compassion. People will feel that, okay, I understand it's a disability, can't see it, but I get that concept. Disabilities can bring compassion on. But if you really want a solution, that's going to help you with trying to pull people together. If you really want to solve things, get a plan in place, whatever that plan is, and then let the kids know. That will pull people together. Even if it's not the best solution you have, it is a solution that will allow the family to bond. It will increase the cooperation. So bring a solution to the table. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends of the family, they're going to be judgmental and there's nothing you can do about it, right? You just understand that they're going to see things differently because they don't have your experience. They don't understand what it's like to live there. Even for professionals, I always tell people when I go into somebody's home, after I leave, I go walk my dog. I don't live there. And so it's easy to be judgmental. It's easy to do that. We do that with other people. People are going to do that with us. Just understand that that's part of it. But once again, you're going to focus on the fact that this is a disability, that we understand that this is difficult, but just understand that they cannot fix it. And it's not about tough love. It's not about just standing firm, because we've tried that. And once again, it comes back over and over and over that the kids keep battering away at our resolve. Focus on solutions. The solution will allow for cooperation. What do you want the grandparents to do? What do you want the aunts and uncles to do? What do you want people to do? Because if they don't know what to do, they cannot help you. So if you're at Thanksgiving dinner, if you're at a holiday party, if you are somewhere where there is a family get together and the child has problems, you need to tell people, this is what I want you to do. They're working on this issue. I'm going to ask you to step away. If somebody's like, do you mind if I talk to them? If that's part of your solution and it works, certainly, please go ahead. Just understand that if they're not really receptive, it has nothing to do with you. And so really talk to them about what it is that you want them to do. But let's say this spills over outside of your home. Let's say it happens in school. If there are problems in school and you are looking for services, you're trying to get the school to understand that this is a problem, then you really want to lay heavy on the disability, because schools have an obligation to focus on the disability. And that's where you get this 504 plan, where there is accommodations. You can have an IEP, which is then says your child has a specific disability, and that IEP allows for protections you wouldn't normally have if they don't have it. And so there is a process to go through that. Just remember that when they go through that process and then they start telling you, oh, they had more problems, and you're really going to want to keep pushing, yes, it's a disability. What is the plan? What is the solution? And we put it back on the school, because the school's job is to find an answer to that. If they're not having problems in school and you're not seeking services, share the absolute bare minimum. That could be nothing. If they don't have problems in school, you may have a child what we would consider super compliant. A super compliant child is somebody that does exceptionally well outside of the home. They are well-mannered, they follow the rules, they are helpful, to the point where you almost want to show them a picture and say, are we talking about the same child? And they're like, yes, they do fantastic. And if that happens, just be thankful that they're doing well in at least one area of their life. But if they are doing well in that area, be very careful about sharing what's going on, because first of all, people are going to be shocked. They're going to be like, I can't believe that happens. But if you're not seeking some remedy from them, if you're not seeking some service that they're going to be able to do, you don't want them to look at your child differently. You don't want them to start saying, well, They did disrupt the class earlier this week. Well, everyone disrupts a class at some point in time. Everyone has a problem at some point in time. But if I'm looking at you differently, 3 kids have problems and 1 child has a disability, I'm going to kind of keep my eye on that one. And I'm going to be like, oh, they had problems. Well, did anyone else have problems? Well, actually, it's true. A few other people have problems. But then why are you singling out my child? And they're doing that because we allowed that to happen. So be careful about having them be singled out if you're not trying to get actual services. When it comes to neighbors, or anybody that can actually intervene directly or indirectly, it should be approached at a time where things are going well. So don't wait until there's an issue. You're going to want to identify the person that you feel is going to be the most beneficial for you. Who is it that is going to actually help you? Because a neighbor might be able to come over in times of need. They might be able to do something, so you're going to want to have a conversation with that. You're going to want to say, okay, well, this is really what's going on. And you can talk once again about the disability, but again, you're going to want to talk about a plan. But if they are not part of that process, they're not going to be intervening, they're not going to be talking to you, then you want to go back to giving them minimum information. One of the things that we talk about all the time is that the volume of the home. If kids are screaming and wailing and things like that, just understand that although your neighbors might not have said anything, they probably have heard it. And instead of letting them come up with their own ideas of what's going on, come up with a script, something relatively simple that you can go over there and just say, hey, look, I know you heard the screaming last night. My child does have some anxiety, and when it spills over, it can get relatively heated. Just understand that it's under control. We are working with somebody to try to get this better, but I do apologize for any inconvenience. Keep it simple, keep it quick, but you might as well talk to them about something that they already know is actually happening. So keep it real brief. It's not their business unless you want more services, right? And that service in the neighbor's case, in a friend of the family's case, those types of things, maybe for some direct intervention. All right, police. You may not call, somebody else may call, but when should you be the one that calls? Well, the thing to remember is that the police are not the boogeyman. They're not the bad guys. They're not there to do the parenting, and they will be the first people to tell you, hey, I'm not here to parent your child. However, there are times where you're going to need to call. And the first and foremost is that if it is unsafe, if you cannot maintain the safety of the home, not just for the child, but for everybody else within that home, then a police phone call needs to be made. You're going to have to 911. You're going to have to say, hey, look, I have a child. They have a disability and they're going to come over. But there are a lot of police stations now. There are a lot of officers that are specifically trained. And you can go when there is times where things are going well. Child's at school, everything's peaceful. You're going to set up an appointment. You're going to talk to the police. You're going to get them an understanding of what is going on with the home and what it is that you would like them to do. We go back to having that plan. You want them to be able to say, when I get to the house, I know that there's a 13-year-old, a 16-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 4-year-old. I know basically what's going on. That will come up on their computer screen, and they're going to know what kind of interventions. Do we need to just go in and do a well-being check? Do we need to transport them to the hospital? Is this a criminal matter? Because sometimes you may want them taken away, but generally speaking, you're going to want them to be assessed at a hospital. Given the choice of going to a detention center and being assessed, I almost always go with the assessment. But you're going to want the police to know what it is that you want ahead of time. If they come to your house and you did not have a chance to talk to them about this, it's spontaneous, they come to your house, whether you called or somebody else calls, you're going to keep it very strict, very brief, in sound bites. Who are you? I am the parent. My name is Jim Kling. I have a 16-year-old child. They're having some problems. They have been diagnosed with mental illness. And we need to bring them to the hospital. We need to have them transported. My name is Jim Kling. I have a 12-year-old daughter. She hurts herself. She is of no danger to other people, but we need her transported to the hospital. My name's Jim Kling. I have a 10-year-old son. He's having some problems. I was wondering if you can talk to him, because if he talks to you, he may settle down, and then we can get him back on track with what we're doing in the home. Really apologize for any inconvenience, but it would be helpful if you can do that. When you call the police, just understand that you are going to get anywhere from a Rambo to a Martha Stewart. You don't know who's coming to your door, and you do lose some of that control. So you got to be careful when you bring somebody else into your home. You don't know if it's going to add or subtract. Just understand that at least they have other interventions. But there are some people that are legitimately concerned that the police could actually make things worse, that they could cause harm, whether emotional harm or physical harm. And so that's where you're going to want to receive them at the door. You're going to tell them in small sound bites, because they're trying to absorb all this information real quickly. I have a child. This is who I am. This is the age of the child. This is their disability. This is what we would like to see happen. Give them some path. Now, they may choose not to follow it. They may take matters into their own hands. That is the risk you take when you bring somebody else in. If you're out in the community, or a neighbor or a bystander says, I'm going to call the police, never stop that from happening. If you try to stop that, then what's going to happen is they're going to make that call and say you're kidnapping someone, you're doing something bad. They're going to look at you as the bad guy. Once again, give them information, keep it brief. My name is Jim Kling. I'm the parent of this child. They're having some problems. They're being treated by a psychiatrist. We just need to get them to calm down. It would be beneficial if you could step away. Certainly, if you don't feel comfortable, I'm not going to ask you to leave, but please move back. And the idea is that the more you try to say, don't pay attention, don't ignore this, don't worry about these issues, the more it's going to bring other people to you. But if you are able to say, this is exactly what's happening, then it will bring their anxiety down. And when their anxiety brings down, then it brings everyone else's anxiety down. Because people need to know that you are in control, even when you don't feel like it. If you're going to a psychiatric hospital, you really want to find out, do you want them admitted or do you want them deflected, which means they will not be actually going into the hospital. And you can talk, and you always want to be honest, but you can word your words in a way that is going to guide you one way or the other. If you think that they're legitimately unsafe, focus on the safety aspect. That will get them hospitalized. Now, keeping in mind that when they're in a hospital, it provides some respite. They are safer, potentially, because they're not going to run into the street. They're not going to be able to jump off a building. But it doesn't mean they're safe. People get hurt and even die in psychiatric hospitals. It does happen. It's uncommon. And depending on the hospital, you will have greater success or less success. But if you cannot manage them safely at home, really focus on that safety. If you believe that they are going to be safe and they have a history of doing this but calming down, then you really want to focus on, I think they are safe, but we want to have you talk to them and let them know that this is a possibility for future events. So they know that you are open to the idea that you're not trying to keep them from medical interventions, but that you believe you can manage them safely at home. If you get a DCFS allegation, right? So DCFS is our Department of Children and Family Services. Every state has them, Department of Human Services, Child Services, whatever the service that your state provides, it allows for a hotline call to be made. If a hotline call is made to you, you want to be honest with them. Do not try to hide things. Do not try to be coy. Don't try to dodge their questions. Answer them openly and honestly. You just don't want to elaborate, because the more you go on and on and on and trying to explain all these problems and all these issues, you may actually look like the crazy person. And so you want to make sure that you're telling them everything that is true. Try not to be defensive to the best of your ability. It is scary. It is with the understanding that you have a sense of powerlessness, but you want to try to convey to them what the problem is going on. Not just in that moment, but generally speaking, what is the problem that your child does have? And they will, in Illinois at least, they will neither say you're guilty or not guilty. You'll be indicated or unfounded. So that says that, yeah, it probably did happen, which is indicated, or unfounded means it probably didn't happen. In either case, you don't have a lot of control over that. If it does turn out to be indicated when you feel it's unfair, do not get upset. Contact a lawyer that specializes in this area, and then you can fight it that way. But again, the more you try to fight it, the more verbose, the more angry you get, the more upset, the more anxious you feel, the more it looks like you are the one that has the problem. And you want to try to stay away from that. All right. Your child's friends, nieces, nephews, somebody else going on. I don't want to talk to them about my child's problems in front of them. Just understand that if you are addressing issues that are happening in the moments, it's going to make people feel more comfortable, right? Not less comfortable. You don't have to always pull them to the side. What makes a situation scary and even unsafe is not when a child has problems. It's when the adult doesn't know what to do about it. When you're like, oh, what do I do? That's when things start to become unsafe, because everyone else is going to be like, well, if you're not in control, what do we do? And so, especially for other kids, certainly for adults, but especially for other kids, you want to be clear of what you're asking. If they're on the playground, they're not supposed to be playing. Sorry, but Johnny has something he has to take care of. I'm going to ask you not to talk to him. Because remember, all the other kids, they're most likely going to listen to the adults. But your son, your daughter is probably not listening to you at that point. Talk to the other kids. Address them. Don't focus your problem or your conversations on the child that's not listening to you anyways. Control the environment. When the environment is controlled, your child will adjust to the new environment. But if you try to control the child, you have no control over that, and you're going to lose the environment. And then it's a free-for-all. Now, all the kids, nobody knows what to do. And then when they leave, they're going to be talking about it. They're going to be saying things about it. And what you want them to do is to be able to realize that the event has happened and it's moved on. Hey, look, they have to take care of something. I know it's kind of scary. Let's go over here. Let's put some TV on. Let's do this. Let me get you some hot chocolate. Let's do something else. When your child eventually calms down and then they reintegrate, what are they going to remember? The kids are going to remember, yeah, they had problems. The parent did something about it, but I got hot chocolate or I was watching TV, things like that. You want them to remember the theme of what's going on, not the actual blow up. Because if you're trying to deal with the child and you lose all the kids, they're going to lose their friends. The nieces and nephews, the parents aren't going to want them over. Nobody's going to want them to hang around. Oh, no, not that family, because they have all these problems. People have problems. You want them to be able to move past that. You don't want to badmouth people. You don't want to, to say, oh, he's a jerk, he's a problem, he's this, he's a that, because they'll remember that, right? And so will the friends, right? Oh, the person said that their child never listens to them, or they're violent, or be careful because they hurt people. When you start talking in those things, all those other people will remember that, and they're going to be afraid to be around your child. You don't want them to be afraid to be around them. You want them to be around when your child is doing well, when they're at that good, great kid stage. And when they're having problems, you want to remove that environment. Give them something to do. Focus on that. Wait till the moment's passed and then reintegrate them back into it. Thank everybody. Tell the other kids, tell the nieces and nephews, all the other kids, hey, look, I know this is hard, but I really appreciate you helping us out. They need to work on this by themselves. We can't really do their job for them. I know this is difficult, but this is really kind of you. Let's do this. Let's move on. And you give them something to do. It's okay to acknowledge that what they're doing is wrong, that it's not nice, it's not right, and you apologize for that happening to them, because we don't mean that to happen, but this is not who they are. We're going to try to fix this. They're working on getting better. But what if looking at this as a problem, as a disorder, is not the way we want to do this? What if we're looking at this in a wrong perspective? See, what I think kids have that have these kind of issues is actually more of a talent than a disorder. I don't know if what they have is something that we have to crush and try to squash. I think it's something that we have to hone. We have to teach them how to manage it. It is like fire. It can burn down forests. It can ravage a house, but it can bake your cookies if you learn how to control it. If they learn how to manage the disorder, then it's no longer a disorder. It becomes a talent, right? People that are anxious make fantastic therapists. They can almost feel the emotions off of somebody, right? If you're OCD, you want them to be doing to be a health inspector, right? Because they're going to watch for everything. Even conduct disorder, people that are cruel and bullies, things like that, if they learn how to manage it. Now, again, they can't be cruel and be bullies, but if they learn how to manage it, they become good, border patrol agents. They become great at working within a prison because they're immune to bribery. They're not going to get sucked in. They're not going to take somebody's side and, oh, I feel bad for you. They're going to toe the line. Now, again, they have to be able to control it because you don't want these people to be cruel and mean in that profession. You don't want people to have, anxiety where the therapist is talking more about their problems than somebody else's. It is about being able to control this disorder to make it a talent, to use it. Because remember, when we go back to that DSM, that book, that manual that identifies the diagnoses, everyone has something in there. You want to make it so it works for you, not against you. I tell people, kids are wolves, not sheep. Kids that are able to stand up to authority figures at an early age, most kids are sheep. They just their way through life. They just follow the rules, and we need sheep. But wolves aren't inherently evil. They just don't want to be fed grass, and you have to treat them differently. But if they learn how to stand up to adults at an early age, who do they become? They become CEOs of major corporations. They don't need a bunch of yes people. They know what to do, and they're able to move through it. I actually find kids like this are less likely to be involved in drugs, alcohol, and gangs because they don't need to be a part of everything else. They walk with their own beat. They continue on. They know what they need to do. The caveat to that is that if they do become involved in drugs and alcohol, if they do become involved in gangs, they're more likely to stay with it. So we really want to avoid them to even starting. And that's really by having a plan, getting them out of there. Do anything it takes, but don't just do anything. Now, this is really important because what happens is that sometimes kids are given medicines and I'm like, well, is it helping? And the parents are like, not really. And I'm like, well, why are you giving it? Well, we have to do something. But doing something and doing something effectively are two totally different things. Therapy works for some people. It's great they have somebody, an outlet to talk to, but it doesn't work for everybody. And if the kids are combative at therapy, it's a fight to get them to therapy. Doing therapy just for the sake of doing therapy isn't helpful. As a matter of fact, it actually can be harmful, in my opinion, because they become treatment resistant. They start talking in I statements and doing things that kids don't normally do. But they're not absorbing anything because they're not able to take those lessons that they're learning in therapy and applying it to the regular life. They're only thinking, I hate going to this therapist. So we want to find a different way, find a different type of therapy. Medications. Should you give medication? Should you not? Well, I'm not a psychiatrist or a doctor, and I'm not going to prescribe anything. But I will say is that I don't like taking medications at all. But I have seasonal allergies, and when I need to, I take Claritin. Claritin helps get through that because it improves the quality of life. Will I die without Claritin? Of course not. But Claritin does help me, right? And there's many different types of medications out there. And so not every medication is going to work with every child, but if it improves the quality of somebody's life, whether it's through your life or whether it's the child's life, if it's improving the quality of life, then medication is not a bad answer. Psychiatric hospitals tend to really have two things that they do well and better than anyone else, but only two things. They're great for medication stabilization. You can change meds, you can kind of see what's going on with that medication adjustment, but they also control safety issues, right? We talked about this before. You can't leave a building, you can't run out into the street, but you can get hurt by other residents, you can get hurt by yourself, things like that. It's not a perfect place. It can be safer, but not necessarily safe. So you want to make sure you're staying on board. You're talking to the people. If they do get hospitalized, don't just talk to the nurse or the psychiatrist. Go in there, introduce yourself to the staff members. Go shake their hands, tell them who you are, what you're here for, what you would like to see during this process where your child's there. And so they will look at your child as an individual instead of just another person, right? You go out there, introduce yourself, become a person, become a face. If you have to go to residential wilderness, things like that, sometimes you just don't have any choice. It's just not healthy. You can't make it. You make it. You've tried all the plans. You've tried everything. Just remember those things look better than they really are. Sometimes I tell people you have to almost see the child as having an allergy to your own home. They can do well somewhere else. They just can't stay at the house. That does happen. But understand that you really have to identify, is this exactly what you want for the child? And if it's not, then you want to say, what is it that they're going to do that I can do? And if there is no answer to you, they just can't maintain themselves in the home, you do have options. How you go about getting there, things like that, that would be for a different webinar. What do we want to do? We want to stop doing what doesn't work. Stop having those conversations. If your family's looking at you funny, if the school's not responsive, then are you covering up or are you having honest conversations? Just remember, honesty has levels, right? It doesn't mean that you're being dishonest because you're withholding some of the information, unless you're purposely trying to do it to deceive the person. But be honest, be open, explain what's going on. Now, we did talk about some bonus information. So before we get to the what's going to happen next, there's a few things that you want to know is when to use the word disability, because we keep on pounding disability, 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 but you don't always want to use that, right? Sometimes you want to focus on anxiety. Remember, we talked about anxiety breeding compassion and things like that. If you want to create change, if you want somebody to do something different, a school, a campus, somebody, you're probably going to want to push the disability. But if you can focus on anxiety, that will actually create compassion. So change is for disability, but compassion is where we want to focus on that anxiety, because most people can relate to that. And so when you're talking to a school, if you're in the middle of a crisis, if you're trying to explain something to somebody, what is your intent? What are you trying to create? Are you trying to create somebody that says, oh, I understand, I want to be supportive? Or are you trying to create somebody to say, okay, you want us to do something different than what we've normally done, right? So when you look at an IEP, that individualized education plan, the IEP is all about the I. We don't do that at this school. I know. That's why it's an IEP. I want you to individualize something. You're going to do something different because my child has a disability. But if you have a teacher or a school that is just irritated by the very thought of having your child come to class, then you really want to push the anxiety point. You want to push the fact that, hey, they can't control this, but if we can help them feel more comfortable by doing this, this, and this, and you want to have a plan going in play. When do you don't share, right? Now, there are times that you do not want to share anything about what's actually happening, and that's when they don't have problems outside of your home. They're back to that super compliance. So I had a client coming up this summer that they had to decide whether they're going to a therapeutic camp or to a regular kind of camp that neurotypical kids go to. And they were going back and forth, and they got a lot of opinions. My answer to them was, do they normally do well? And they say, yeah, in camp, they do fine. They never have problems, things like that. Then send them to a regular camp, because when you send them to a therapeutic camp, they're going to be around all these kids that have problems. And sometimes having some normalcy is not a bad thing. You don't want to compare yourself to the people having problems. You want to compare yourself to the people that will bring you up. And when they went to camp, everything went great. When you're talking about friends or friends' parents, if you say, hey, look, just so you know, they may have a problem, they're going to be like, whoop, I don't know if I want them coming over in my house. I don't know if I want them playing with my child. But if you know that they're not going to have problems, and it's only pertaining to the house, or it's a very limited set of circumstances, you want to share very little, if anything. But I don't want you to become more invested. And so my last point here, my last piece of advice is you can't be more invested than your child, especially when it comes to an activity. If you're trying to get them into a camp, if you're trying to get them to do this, or you're trying to get them into a club, or whatever it happens to be. Because the more invested you are and they're not, it's going to cause pressure, right? This is a lot of money I'm spending in camp. You have to go. You cannot refuse. You're trying to push them into something. Your anxiety will push into them, and anxiety is contagious. It's going to spread. And so what I usually tell people is if you're going to a camp, if you're going to sign up for a class, even if it's only $5, find out what their refund policy is. And again, talk about that anxiety. Don't really push disabilities, because camps are going to be like, oh, I can't handle a disability. We're not equipped for a disability. But no. They're just anxious about something. But what is your refund policy if their anxiety is too much, if they can't do it? Well, we really don't have one. Can we talk about one? Because what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're not invested, even if it's only a few dollars. Don't be more invested than they are. When it comes to things like property, going on a vacation, I always tell people you shouldn't really buy insurances unless you have kids that have problems. Then you want to really look at that insurance. Trip or vacation insurances are extremely important, because I've had people call from the airport saying they won't get on the plane. What do we do? Now, if you're working with us, we would say do this, this, and this. But if you're not working with us, you have to have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, you could lose that vacation. And instead of being out thousands of dollars and having resentment and they know they've done something wrong and the whole family hates them and now you have problems with them, if you have insurance, it mitigates some of that. You don't have to feel as bad about that. Have purchase protections. Make sure that if there's damage to property, if there are big property issues like picture windows, cars, things like that, you have comprehensive on your car. You have homeowners or rental insurance. You can do those for big ticket items. But again, remember, you want to reduce your anxiety. When I go to somebody's house, our comprehensive on our cars are zero. So if somebody says, hey, I'm really upset at Jim Kling, and they smash a window, yes, that's inconvenient, but it will cost me nothing to fix it. So I don't have to be like, you can't touch my car, stay away from my car. I wanted to remove that as a possibility. And so this goes all back to checking yourself, making sure that you have a plan. You bring your anxiety down. As your anxiety comes down, everyone else will. Whether it is you, the school, friends, family, whoever it is, bring the anxiety down. You be in control. I want to thank everybody for having a time. There are some things you should know about. The next thing that we're going to be talking about is January 7th, every Monday, the first Monday of every month. We're going to have a new webinar, and we're going to talk about therapeutic gaming. Now, this is really about games, conversations, activities, how to strengthen the relationship with you and your family. You should be enjoying your family's time. We want them to have fun. We want you to have fun. These are really pivotal moments in our lives. We're not going to have them forever, and we want to enjoy the kids when we have them. So we hope you can join us for our next webinar. If you want to stick around and ask questions, we're happy to entertain some. I have a few here. We're going to do that, but I want to thank everybody for coming out, and we will see you next month. So for those that are sticking around, the term disability is tough because people see disability as being terminal or permanent, and that's kind of one of the questions that we're getting. Is this a word that we want to do? And the reason why we do that is because of the emotions, because of the event, what it brings to the table. By using one word, it gets people to understand the gravity of the situation. But a disability, whether they continue to have it or not, really is not the point. The idea is that how are we conveying in a few words what we want other people to understand? And so the way we do that is we choose our words very carefully. Just know that for us, it doesn't have to be permanent. As a matter of fact, some of these things that we're trying to get rid of, as I was saying before, we want to actually keep. So if they learn how to manage themselves, if they learn how to handle it, if they learn how to control this, this is going to be a talent. It will not be a disorder, but it will take some effort. We'll take a plan. Takes a community. So again, I want to thank everybody for coming out. If you do have questions or comments, feel free to email us. Feel free to reach out to us. We will not only respond to you with those, but we will also take those questions and answers, and then we will let everyone else know what those answers are. So you'll be able to look at our blogs. You'll be able to get emails please sign up for our newsletter. We're going to continue putting that out every other month through the year 2019, and then hopefully we'll continue moving this forward. I hope everyone enjoys and has a very safe and happy holidays, and we'll talk soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.